What's up, friends, and welcome back to the show. When was the last time you sprinted, huh? Like full on, just went for it like you were being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. Well, that's what today's conversation is all about, the lost art of sprinting. The complete human movement that preserves your energy, your athleticism, your insurance plan against aging. I'm speaking to Graham Tuttle. He is the Barefoot Sprinter online, a giant audience of people that he is helping to reclaim the ability to sprint again. Why is it so important? Why should we be doing it? What should we be doing to get back to it? And why barefoot? Tune in and find out. Graham, when was the last time you ran as fast as you possibly could?
A week and a half ago. Week and a half ago. I'll give you that. Yeah,
okay, I'm taking an early dub because mine was yesterday. I did Sunday sprints in preparation for this call. I was like, you know what? I got to sprint. I gotta come armed and sore for my man Graham today.
That is the truth, man. This is a unique season of life with the amount of new variables we've got going on, but it has continued to reinforce my underlying thesis that sprinting is an essential movement for the human body. It just can't be replaced.
Say more about that. Super fascinated by this idea. I agree with it, but I would love you to kind of map it out from your perception and for our listener. Why is it so fundamentally human and why is it so important?
Well, you can make it. Well, there's a few different fronts you can make this argument on, but I'll start with just basic training. And if you look at how to develop a complete body, right? So there's four main capacities you can look at for what it takes to be a whole human. There's strength, there's speed, there's stamina, and then this idea of shape or stretch you can kind of lump into a category, right? So we'll start with strength. Obviously, you need to be able to stabilize and resist force. That's important. Everybody gets that. They go to the gym, they do push, they pull, they hinge, squat, etc. Right? But I'd say working with some blue collar boys in the last few months, renovating my house, building out a gym. I've realized that there's a whole different type of strength, which is just like understanding leverage and being able to manipulate things with ease. I'll say that. Meaning, a lot of times we go to the gym. You'll have to forgive me because my brain just goes on so many different things. But we go to the gym and we have this idea of I'm going to try and make this movement as difficult as possible. So if you think about what a lateral raise is, it's the most difficult way you could move a weight out to the side of your body relative to if I just need to get this thing up, then I'd clean it. I bring it to my kettlebell snatch, for example, versus a dumbbell lateral raise. Mm-hmm. Essentially, you're doing the same thing, which is lifting a dumbbell up to your shoulder height. But in one way, you're trying to make it as hard as possible. And so if you think about what real strength is, it's how do I use leverage, put my body in the right position to join the center of mass of this thing. So how do I integrate with the real world? And I think that's what you see in grappling and martial arts is a strength that really applies. So that's the first thing is strength. Then you start to see, stamina. That's another thing we get. We got the hybrid athlete. People want to go on a treadmill and they want to go do a bench press. And so there's this whole buzz in the fitness sphere about this hybrid athlete. Well, stamina is just really your ability to stay in the moment. And there's three energy systems. There's the immediate one, the creatine phosphate, where I'm just doing a short-term immediate actions. There's the burner one, which is what we like to talk about, the anaerobic, where you're doing a lap around the track. Your lungs are burning, legs are screaming. And then there's this all day, I'm just going to go forever. And so that's where we endurance running, 5Ks, half marathons, that's kind of in vogue. But really what stamina boils down to is your ability to manage discomfort and to stay in that moment. And that's really all it is. It's just how fully can I bring my force in this moment of discomfort. And so once you start to have the ability to do that, then everything else, there's a whole cascade of blood changes with lactate, with carbon dioxide and acidity shifts that go on. And so you can kind of get really in the weeds there to optimize that. But deep down, there's a stress level. There's a way you perceive an experience and the way you can stay in it. For example, we're talking about as young parents, there is probably no greater stamina challenge than it's 3:30 and your baby's waking up yet again and you just have to show up and do it again. And we don't think about that kind of stuff as stamina, but it's emotional regulation amidst stress. And once you start to realize that the human animal is this full multi-spectrum thing, you get, that's stamina. So once you develop that emotional capacity, then there's this idea of shape and stretch, which kind of people take to think of yoga, where I'm going to get into these positions and stretch with laxity and have full range of motion. But really a lot of stretches should be boiled into the strength category. If you think about what it means to be strong in a short and long range position. So short would be I'm squeezing and holding a sandbag in as close as possible. Long is I'm able to swing and brachiate is just swinging from branches like monkeys. but I can haul on, I can do a dead hang, I can hang, I can swing, I can throw, I can basically maintain tension through my connective tissue, even though my muscles are stretched out. That's a form of strength. We don't think about it like that, but you can imagine if you were to go into a yoga class and then add some, just even little bits of load at these longer stretched out positions, it would change the tone of the overall thing. And so that's important because you want to be able to bring force and stabilize. Again, it goes back to stabilization at every point. So the real thing you want to look at when you get into shape and stretches, how well can you access these different positions to get in skills? So for example, if you want to think about throwing or jumping or rolling or falling or crawling, they're all different shapes your body's in. Meaning crawling, for example, is you're loading your shoulders and your hips at the same time. And it's kind of like, you're pushing down, the joints going in the back of the capsule in a closed chain position. The hands and feet are fixed on the ground at different points. Hanging, you're suspended, your hands are fixed, but your shoulders are pulled away. You're throwing, you're in a cross-body rotational thing. Your spine has to move, your glute and your opposite shoulder have to engage. So there's all these shapes you get in, and your ability to get in that shape effectively, meaning I can coordinate my body and then create tension there. That's what I think about when you look at shape, okay? So shape is really just this part of engaging in context and doing different things. Like, how do you want to get better at throwing? Well, you throw a ball. And so it's that kind of thing. And so that's a big thing that people kind of get, but they don't really see the full versatility. And so when we talk about sprinting as an essential aspect, first part of that is shape, and the other part of that is speed. Now, this is a big thing that is missing from modern day training protocol for the average person. So if you think about speed, if you're thinking athleticism, and I want to go work on my, my top end sprints and my jumping and my throwing and my NFL combine times. And while those are obviously important there, what's missed is that these same applications are important to give the body feedback for everyday life. It's kind of how the Formula One driving technology or the military fighting technology is eventually transferred down to the civilization population. And we're like, oh, this is important. Maybe may not need it at the same degree, but you still need a car that can accelerate to get on a highway, or you still need weaponry and stuff like that functions, right? And so we see this from testing at the highest levels. Okay, there's still an application of this at the regular person. And for example, one of the single biggest risks of falls for people as they age is single leg strength and leg speed, meaning you need to be strong enough to hold yourself on one leg, but you also have to be fast enough to get yourself there. I mean, how many times have you tripped going up a stair and you pick your foot up and catch yourself again? That speed is your ability to connect your brain to your body and to, I say brain, but I think let's just say the larger consciousness of your fascial neuromuscular musculoskeletal system, right? There's a lot more that goes into like the intelligent human animal than just your brain sends a nerve to signal down to the acetylcholine junction and that fires this specific thing, because there's a myriad of muscle, there's the word for it. It's neuromuscular. It's not the muscle belly, so that's like the whole city, but like there's neighborhoods within the city that all fire, and there's a myriad of those that all connect, and it's like this constant shifting kaleidoscope of muscle activation. So we think of it as like, this is your glutes, this is your hamstrings, but like there's like 100 different tiny neighborhoods within the hamstring city, so to speak, that all have to fire in different positions. So that's where you start to combine my ability to move quickly, which is just clarity of intention. How well can I set a thing, be focused, and act on that, with the specificity of that, which is how well can I get in this shape? And so you start to see skill as this overall umbrella of, can I coordinate my stamina, my strength, my speed, and my position to be able to do this job, to interact with this context. And so this is where you pull it. Okay, sprinting is an essential human ability. Now, what do I mean by that is, if you can sprint, you can do everything else. If you can jump, you might not be able to sprint. If you can roll, meaning if you can sprint, it means you have the spinal mobility, you have the hip range of motion, you have the single leg strength, you have the speed, you have the overall coordination. Everything in your body has to be online. You can't go and sprint if you're distracted, if you're scared, or if you're in pain. And so you can start to build that up, the steps of human ability, from starting just sitting on the ground, getting on and off the ground, to crawling, to being able to walk and balance on one foot, to be able to stabilize, which is basic weightlifting, to be able to kick, to be able to throw, which are basically just pushing your limbs away from your body and letting them work independently, and then being able to skip or hold a rhythm, then be able to bounce, add plyometrics to that, being able to jump, which is to accelerate and decelerate force, and then finally be able to sprint. And so you go up this 10-step ladder to scale towards sprinting, but you realize when it comes to non-competitive, single discipline, I'm just going to be able to see what my body can do. For like an example with the cars, can a car go forward? Can it reverse? Can it turn left? Can it right? Do the signals? When you go into you get your car inspected, what are the basic things you're looking for? Do the signal light work? Can you turn it on, etc.? That is sprinting is the peak of that. Once you have that, then there's a different context of, okay, what am I doing with my body? And that's where you start to look at like sport and context, but that's a little bit of a different conversation, because that's where you start to apply skill, which is coordinating their speed, strength, stamina, and shape to context. And context pulls that out of you. But if you do not bring your full set of human abilities to bear into that context, you're not showing up as a full human. That's an interesting conversation. What then are you? But, you know.
Yeah, I really like that idea of how maintaining the ability to sprint kind of collapses everything underneath it as tick, job done, but not necessarily going the other way guarantees your ability to sprint. That's really fascinating. But let's try and define sprinting here, because I think we just need to try and figure out what we're saying, right? Because sprinting, I think everybody understands at a basic level, it's just running very fast. But is there a certain threshold where it crosses over from running fast to actually sprinting? Does sprinting have to be done in a certain mechanical way at a certain load? Is it to do with just meeting a person's edges and their perceived rate of exertion? How do you define sprinting?
So the short answer is yes. And the issue, though, is that you would have to, like, yes, there is a difference between running fast and sprinting, but where does that line start? And so this is the idea of the boundary. I'll forget his name, is this a phenomenal researcher on life. Anyways, I shouldn't even bring it up because I can't remember his name, but it'll bug me. But the idea, though, is he brought up this idea, like, there's no transitions. Like, yes, okay, there's a difference between walking and running and striding and sprinting. Great. You show me where those lines are. And you realize that everything that exists on the spectrum, which you will make okay, anytime that there's high level, I don't say snobbery, but there's people that have a discipline and they make money about something, then it is in their discipline. You can't depend on somebody to understand that, which their salary depends on them not understanding. And when you're a sprint coach, or you're an elite strength coach, or you're a sports specific coach, so to speak, you're a physical therapist or a chiropractor or a massage therapist or a cognitive therapist, you realize that anytime there's a discipline that your money is dependent, is you're there by default, you're reinforcing a gate, which is, this is my domain. So what you start to see is most of the discourse online is people arguing back and forth about where these boundary lines are. But if there were clear boundary lines, there wouldn't be an argument about it, right? So the point that we have a disagreement, meaning between this point and this point, there's definitely some transition. I just don't know where. So I define sprinting as being able to move forward with your highest, with as fast as you want to go, meaning as fast as you can. So
you can go.
Yes, because in some sense there's an aspirational and then there's a technical. So technically, you're looking at the top, the ability to have the tissue tolerance and the speed and the confidence to be able to sprint at max effort of a human ability is it's very difficult. It takes a lot of training to be able to do that. But you also realize that, okay, Lyles won a gold medal in the 100-meter, but what if that was a forested 100-meter stretch? Immediately, the second the context changes. So, if we're going to look at sprinting in the context of, okay, it's this specific tissue output and ability, but like, where does that exist? Yes, maybe in some of the plains and stuff like that, but maybe if you're a cheetah in the middle of the Serengeti, I don't know where cheetahs are, but like, some type of a plains animal that can sprint, really a gazelle, that may be a different context. But if you're sprinting through the woods and you have different variables to think, like, you might not be going as fast as you can, but like, nobody's going to say that that's not max intention. Right. So for my intent and what I care about is inspiring people to be able to say, if I put you on flat ground, could you run as fast as you want to go for 60 to 80 meters? Like, that is the litmus test, period. And then everything else, it's like, it's just window dressing. And yes, there are technical differences in how you can move. And as you get higher, like the highest ability, you can get this like double impulse effect where you hit the ground and your tissue actually propels you forward. But like, that's like saying just because you aren't driving an F1 car with the highest ability doesn't mean you're not driving fast, kind of thing. Like, or you're not. So there's that. So hopefully that doesn't get too complex, but sprinting I define as just your ability physically. And this deep inside. And that's an important disclaimer too, which is the second you put an objective standard, it becomes easier for people to hide behind that. And so the question is, are you healthy? right? Especially for your audience. Are you healthy? Well, who defines what health is, right? Well, we all know we see it, and there's definitely a diseased and a health, but like, where is that line? And because that line is like, at some point you transition, but the second you say, well, it's because your VO2 max is this, your resting heart rate is this, your blood glucose is this, your HbA1c is that, your cholesterol is that. And so, okay, great, good numbers. But health, we all know, is a little bit more complex, right? There's a little bit, I would imagine the mainstream of your thing is that there's a beingness, there's a human aspect of like, if you're going to be healthy, it's also like, are you fertile? Are you engaged in life? Are you happy? And those all relative, they are not easily measured, not quantifiable. And so in the same way, when you go, well, what does it mean to sprint? It's like, you're just saying that because like, let's just say, even if you can go run a 4.7 at a 40-meter dash, but you know that you used to be able to do a 4.6, or you could do it, but you're holding back a little bit because your hamstring, whatever, is off. I don't care. Like, that to me is like, there's a delta there between what you could do and where you at. So that's where I hesitate with the objective thing, but really it's your ability to run as fast, to be uninhibited in your expression of self. That's a better way of saying it.
That's a good one. Yeah, because it's reminded me of a conversation I had with my friend today after class. We were training this morning and I was teasing the guys about sprinting, funnily enough, because this conversation was top of mind. And one of my training partners said, I don't really sprint anymore. And this is a conversation I want to have to you because it's rooted in fear. I don't want to pull my hamstring. So he said, and even when I do sprint, I don't sprint full out. So in my head, I'm like, well, you don't sprint then, because to your definition and how I would define it as well, collapsing all of the technical parameters is basically, can you, with your capabilities, run as fast as you desire and want to? And if you can do that, then you're sprinting in my book. So he said, yeah, when I do sprint, I don't go all out. So I'm like, so you just run fast, but there's a difference because that level of being at your, whatever you want to call it, your 85% to your 99.9%, where you are actually flying through space as fast as you possibly can, that is sprinting. But it invokes so much fear for so many people. I train with some fit dudes. Like, these are physically impressive people that are terrified of sprinting. I don't want to pull a hamstring. That's going to send me out for a long time. Why do people fear something that is so human so much?
Oh man, there's about 5 things there. So the category of what you're describing is called a stride, right? And to be fair, if you can stride, that is excellent. Like, that puts you with this ability. And this is where you have to kind of break the conversation apart between optimal human expression and adequate human existence, so to speak. Meaning, you show up, you do your job, you're doing great. There's a bit of a spiritual element that comes into this as well. Meaning, you have to think about, what does it mean for you to sprint? Like, okay, what has he said? I don't sprint as much as I could. What he's saying is he's holding himself back from fully putting himself there. And when it's baked in fear, it's because you don't trust yourself. And if you take that statement and put it in any other context, I'm not as honest as I could be because I'm afraid of someone using it against me. I don't really let my guard down in my relationship because I think she'll make fun of me. I don't really do what I want to do. I don't play the songs I wrote because I'm afraid that I'll be a failure. Like, you immediately see it for what it is, which is, I don't trust that my body can maintain this. And so it goes to a deep belief about and it's very hard because our entire conversation about human ability has been shaded in the medical insurance products world, meaning the body's been broken down to a spreadsheet. How do you take a wild acre of force and turn it into something we can understand? Well, you put some plot lines down there, you make it into a grid, and you cut it and you slice and dice. And when you have a medical product that has to stabilize the body, you now think of the joints as pieces. Humans become a glorified machine. You have a insurance provider that only understands, okay, this is an ACL surgery. That means you're going to have 24 sessions afterwards. Okay, how much can we quantify that? What's the payout for the provider? What's our profit here? Okay, this is how much we charge you. You start to see that this is the way that all that stuff bleeds into, you talk about performance at the highest level from military and F1 going down. Well, guess what? Pain and the pain, surgery, disease, that whole industry bleeds up. And so what you start to see is the wearables. Okay, shoes keep you safe, turn into shoes are going to do the job for you. Turn slowly. These are super shoes with super insoles that'll help you move faster. Not only will you fix your plantar fasciitis, you will also have super springs. That shades in the way people think of themselves. And so, especially when we go to the gym, and we talked about this idea of context earlier, and I think this is a little bit more muddy. Let's just say my first book talks about Born to Sprint. My aspirational next book, which I've outlined, would be the importance of returning to context. But I do think that these are inextricable. It's just not fully fleshed out yet. But if you don't have a context that requires engagement, then you can sit and pick and choose what you want, right? We talk about parenthood as being such a dynamic thing, because I think what people don't realize is, and it's hard to quantify, but when you become a parent, let's talk home ownership, right? If you own a home, welcome to home ownership. And what does that mean? Well, a home by default will pull a set of skills and experiences out of you that you would otherwise not have chosen for yourself. Oh, you got to figure out a little bit about plumbing, a little bit about electricity, a little bit about, wow, there's water on the floor. What do I do? Wait, what do you mean the roof's leaking? And even if you don't become a general contractor, fix yourself, you are now thrust into this world which has unforeseen things. And so there's a level of, I need to be adaptable in order to be able to do this because the buck stops with me because I own this, right? And I think that's what people talk about at a different level when we talk about parenting. Well, it's the same thing, but with emotional regulation. Nothing about kids is technically hard, meaning it's like, yes, the thing weighs 10 pounds. Okay, I can pick that up. I can change. But emotionally, the regulation you have to not murder this thing and to be kind to your spouse and to, like still do work and manage this stuff. You are now thrust into this thing which calls forth from you a whole set of abilities and skills that you otherwise would have been like, I don't have to do that when I play video games on the couch. And so when we look at training, this is the irony of the whole thing, is that when training becomes an end to itself, it becomes this thing where it's devoid of context. And you get some things like High Rocks or CrossFit or whatever that kind of like hint at, we're going to challenge you in a way that's, what's that? CrossFit's got this like catchphrases, unpredictable, something, constantly varied, something like that. And this is where people get a lot of like competitive guys. And so pickleball, you start to see a little bit of this, there's like a bleed into sport, but the real context of training it wasn't a thing. There were some eccentrics that did the weightlifting on the outside. And then we think of like Arnold in the 60s, 70s, where bodybuilding became a thing, which I'm building my body. It's like, well, what, I'm building a structure. It's like, well, you're going to live in it? You're going to be a hospital. There's a big difference there. But we don't think about that. We just like, I'm building a body. Okay, great. But when the aesthetic became a thing, and let's just say, this is why people in that whole niche, I'll say, or bucket are really interested in quantification, because like, great, you went for a run. Well, you can't, with bodybuilding, I can flex and show you what I built. Well, if I went for a run, how do I show it? Well, look at my Strava numbers. Look at my VO2 max. Look at my mouth time. Look at my That's why they care so much. Who cares? It's like, just because we arbitrary that a minute has 60 seconds and an hour has 60 minutes. This is my mile time or my marathon time of 3 hours or 2 hours and 99 minutes, whatever, 59 minutes. Guess what? If it was any different, we care about 225 pounds on the bar because it's 2 plates. But if you were in England, as you are, you wouldn't care about that. You'd be thinking that it's like, I don't know, 198 or how many kilos is in 100, or 100 kilos is how many pounds? 220. You'd be thinking 220. That's 5 pound difference. But like how many guys will bench 200 and then they can't get over that 220? It's a mental thing. And so you start to realize that this kind of arbitrary constructs around training are just basically like games we use to prove that we're there, that we did something. And what that is just people without a context. Because the second you become a parent, you start to realize you're playing on a different mode, which is like the context is baked in and you can't put words, so you can't quantify it, but you know what's there. Because when you look at your daughter or your son, and you're like, there's something there. I don't know what it is, but you know what? Like I feel it. And that's good enough for me, right? When I remember when my wife, the first of the 2 twins popped out, it was just like, oh my gosh. And the second one was like, this is a lot. But it's just this moment of like, there's a thing, there's a there. And so I think what you get and the long roundabout for your friend is like when your entire concept of fitness and well-being is baked into this container, which is quasi hobby that's also linked into a little bit of comparison, which is a self-worth, because you're taking a competitive spirit that you would have channeled into sports when you were a kid, and now you're going to go and do this as an adult. But it gives you multiple levels to compete on, and then you have numbers to be able to hide behind, and you're going to do this thing. It's like, and there's a whole level of orthorexia where people really conflate their self-worth with their ability to suffer. I mean, there are so many layers baked into what it is we expect from a physical experience when we look at training. That people say, for a lot of people, it's their drug. It's no different than a heroin or a cocaine for them. Like, I got to go but it's funny because it's like, I remember I was doing jujitsu. I still do jujitsu, but I was talking to a guy years ago, and he was a young guy, younger than me. He's a brown belt, and he's like just barely moved the warm up. He's just walking, but I feel so good afterwards. I'm like, yeah, like the substitute cocaine with what you just said. It's like, I know I feel horrible right now, and it's the same thing. And we don't realize that like beating your body up is not a way to show love. It's not a way to express physical movement. How many people are so destroyed from the training that they can't actually move? Right. And again, there is a line between doing something that challenges you and you actually are not damaging your tissue, but you're pushing to the point where you're like, okay, I'm doing this in service of a better good, but hard is a concept that needs to die when it comes to physical training, because like, why do hard is only is an emotional judgment, meaning I don't know if I can actually do it. Like, that's what hard is I don't know if I can do this. There's fear. But the second you do it, it's no longer hard. It can be technically challenging. It can be difficult. It could take energy from you, but that's not hard. So then how do we keep chasing this? Because it feels good to do hard things, because it's like the overcoming. And so what do we do is we create these smaller and smaller little constructs, like St. George going around fighting dragons, killing lizards at the end of it. Like, that's what it turns into. And so then what you get is your friend says, "Oh, I can't do it." Well, what is he really saying? I'm afraid that if I get injured, I wouldn't be able to do this thing that makes me have some level of control in my life. And therefore I would be scared. Therefore I'm going to pull back and do this thing. And so I'll stride. And then that fear slowly seeps in and changes the tissue, because though we talk about this as a conceptual level, everything we've talked about has been heady. Your fascia, the body, the animal you live in, and say fascia is just connective tissue. That's the suit that wraps around every muscle and bone. It's one connective cotton candy layer that hardens in some places when you don't move, and moves and glides and bounces in others when you do. That is just a blind man in a cave that receives input based on what you do. And again, it's not just what you do, it's also how you experience it. Because if I've dislocated my shoulder, me doing a little overhead snatch is going to be a very different experience than you doing an overhead snatch who's never had that injury. And like, the movement is the same to our tissue, but my experience, both from a lactate perspective, from a cortisol perspective, from a blood acidity level to my breathing, is my posture is very different. Therefore, my tissue perceives something in a very different level. And so that is what's robbed long term. Like, so because the next question is, why does it matter if you don't sprint fully? It's like, okay, it doesn't really matter, but until you need to. For example, and it does matter because you're not it really matters because if you are not expressing yourself in the fullest extent of your soul, so to speak, something dies in that vacuum. I don't know what it is, but something does. And then the other side of it, though, is if you're not moving yourself in a way, if you don't feel like you can move in all those ways, then like, that's a thing. Your tissue is no longer moving, and that leads to the longer term compensations. And that's really baked into another thing, which is something else is filling the vacuum. If you're in the fitness sphere, meaning if I go and do CrossFit all the time and I'm, doing my thrusters and my burpees, your body is shaping to that. And the further you go from being able to maintain the ability to sprint, the more you can become compensated to that. And then the little aches and pains pop up 2, 3, 4, 5 years later. And you say, well, it's just, you don't realize that it's like, okay, it's because you got off a few degrees early. And then the shoes, the braces, the sleeves, the pills, the shots, those all just kept you going. And now it's just harder for you emotionally to turn the corner.
I knew there was a reason I wanted to talk to you. Because it wasn't just, you got to run fast because it's good for you. There's so much more to this question. There's so many directions I want to go now too. It's two scatter ADHD beauty brains meeting here. But what I couldn't ignore when you was talking about that kind of layer behind the fear in sprinting, which is almost like a self-development tool, if you will, a fear of showing up in other areas of your life. You know what's really required for that is this word that gets thrown around a lot, like vulnerability. Being able to show like weak parts of yourself courageously, in the chance that you might be wounded, but it's also where the massive amount of growth is. And then I got this like image in my head of sprinting being the ultimate test of your physical vulnerability too. And we know that you can't really divorce the physical from the mental, emotional, and spiritual either. So if you can, be physically vulnerable, and when I say that, doesn't mean that it necessitates vulnerability, but it will expose your weakest areas, right? Like if you do move like crap and you've melded yourself around these dysfunctional patterns, well, good luck sprinting. You are more likely to injure yourself because you've become so tight. And that person is also probably tight, I would have to guess, internally in some capacity. So that's just a really interesting metaphor. I've always felt that movement is life, and it's so much more than exercise, and it's a physical, energetic, spiritual expression of who we are. And when I've had a tighter body, I've usually had a tighter mind. When I've had a looser body, I've usually had a looser mind. In fact, not 2 weekends ago, I did a psychedelic ceremony, and I've been doing CrossFit a lot recently. And I got this kind of message of like, CrossFit is stupid. And here I am still in the gym, loving CrossFit and the camaraderie and the challenge, but seeing through some of the cracks that I was getting sucked into over the last couple of years as I got a little bit obsessed with it. In fact, I train in Cookville at CrossFit Mayhem, which is the world's most famous CrossFit gym.
Rich Froning.
The goat of CrossFit, Rich Froning. And you said something that he said and will say on podcasts, that I am a fitness addict and CrossFit is my drug. And given another set of situations or circumstances, it could have been gaming or alcohol or you name it. But he's like, this is my addiction and I need it to function well. And, what we do as culture is judge what's a good addiction and what's a bad addiction. Fitness is surely a better addiction than cocaine or meth. And I think you could make arguments as to why that might be true, but it is interesting that if you get to the root of it, we do have these like addictive tendencies, these needs to seek some sense of control and enjoyment too, because like I do enjoy being with this group every morning and the challenge and the pushing, but I can see that after a couple of years of that, I came from more of a movers background, more into things like animal flow and jujitsu and mixed martial arts. And I moved way better than I do now. But objectively, I'm a way better CrossFitter than I was then. And it's this constant battle of trade-offs. I'm way stronger. I'm more jacked. My VO2 max is way higher. But my movement language is a lot shittier. Like I forgot a dozen languages at this point. And now I'm like, it's how do I balance both of these things? And just something that I'm noodling on after your little diatribe there.
Well, it's funny. My brain just works in big loops. I promise you, everything's connected. And so it's like once I start to close a loop and I realize there's another like thing, it's a big loop, but it will all come together. One of the things you mentioned, and I think this is your experience is not alien to the majority of people, is this idea that the way we perceive fitness is baked into the incentivized models that subsidize the money, basically. When you have a gym, okay, when you buy a book, there's a book price. You wouldn't buy it. Like you'd be surprised if a book was $100, right? Because you're like, books are like what, $12 to like $40. Like that's a book price, right? And the online programs are a little bit less regulated, but our brain's price is just an exchange of value, right? So there's a way we perceive price. This is a gym membership. This is how much it's okay to spend on a membership. And so we have this, okay, it's like, $100 to $300 a month to spend on my fitness because that's a lot, right? Because I have my insurance and that takes a lot of money. That's my health. And so I'm taking we don't understand health as this bigger thing. We start to think it in like subcategory silos. Okay, there's my fitness and then there's my new food and then there's my supplements and my doctor's appointments and my dentist. And we kind of lump it all together. And so that we don't realize that like, it's all health. And I think that the idea of radical health is like radically redetermining your definition of what health is. It's like, oh no, it's one big thing. And so that's where you start to see the other side, which is there's no expenses too much in some sense. Like I'm going to get the best red light thing, best red light therapy. I'm going to get customized supplements and like I'm going to try all the science. I'm going to spare no expense of my time. I have a 2-hour morning routine. And then you realize that like you have kids and you're right in the middle. Somewhere in the middle there is like understanding that health is this important thing because that is life, so to speak. And if you don't have health, then what do you have? And so in a smaller subset of that, the way we think about the business model of like, I want fitness, I'm going to offer a fitness service to somebody. And okay, I'm a gym. I have rent, I have overhead payments, I have staff, I have expenses, right? So therefore I have to be able to cost a certain amount. And so when I have an exchange as a business to a person, I'm thinking, how much money can I get from you as a lifetime value for my customer? If you watch any Hormozy content, then you realize what's your LTV, so you start to think about this, right? So we start thinking, okay, I'm a business, I offer a service. And so therefore we start to teach people in this way implicitly that you don't need variation. You just need to come here. And I'm not saying every gym does this, but the vast majority of use, this is where you see a cycle studio that at the very end, they'll do like 5 minutes of bicep curls because we want to get strength too for our ladies. And we're going to do or a yoga place that's going to do some power Pilates. And so meaning you start to see this one thing, like a red, let's just say a Roy G. Biv color on the spectrum. You see a red, like we're red, but then a red's trying to be a purple. Well, it's like you might blend over a little bit and have some like, a magenta, or I don't know if that's the right color, but like a violet or something like that. But it's not the same thing as being in this other space. And so it's not no different than music genres, right? Rock gets a very different feel than country or than rap or than folk. And you can both are when you're dancing to them, you're moving your hips, but there's a different experience of all that stuff. And so the hardest part is that when you try to convince for you, CrossFit is beautiful in the way that there is a contained set of movements. I've heard you can do CrossFit in a hallway. Some people say that depends on where you go, but there's a contained set of movements. There's a simple set of rules. So you make a game about my ability to just show up and be present. It's like pushing a sled. You can push a sled as hard as you want for as long as you want. You're not going to get injured. And so there's varied levels of that, which is a little bit of challenge, enough spice that it's like, there's a little bit of fear, but I did that. There's enough spice that makes it hard. Remember that hard is an emotional label. Plus the camaraderie, plus the competition, plus the effort that is like, this is physically challenging and a little bit of technical skill. That combination is a perfect cocktail for a little bit of a
Yeah.
fitness, like a fitness drink, so to speak. This
Yeah.
is great. You go to that level too many times, you start to run into problems. So like CrossFit, for example, because you have to define what CrossFit is. It's like you just mentioned, you said, I'm a great CrossFitter. Well, I have a good VO2 max. I'm strong. I'm, let's say you have the skill set for the specific movements that like double unders and ring muscle ups and et cetera, whatever CrossFit specializes in. But each one of those in its own thing is kind of its own little domain. Like, okay, VO2 max, meaning, apologies for trying to communicate too many things at once. The way you define crossfitting is because you put that as juxtaposed against something like a mixed martial arts as though it's a different thing, as though it's different from just being an animal-based flow movement, or let's just say a cyclist for an endurance. If you just take away that top label and then look at the subcategories, you start to say, well, what am I capable of? And so if I were to put this in specific CrossFit terms, let's just say you're crushing your Fran, but then the second it comes to double unders, you can't do it anymore. You would literally tell me, well, just practice double unders, right? So like within the umbrella of CrossFit, you would just separate the specific skills into different domains and say, just work on that. So if I took exactly what you said, well, I'm great at CrossFitting, but I've lost my ability to, let's say, play with movement. So let's say animal-based flow, or to maintain physical strength in close quarters, work with somebody's will, physically, have a chess match with somebody's will, which is martial arts, or to, like, let's say, objectively as strong as I want, right? Then it would be something, okay, well, add that flavor back in to your week. So then the hard part is, well, that means I'd have to change my schedule. Okay, because you're in a gym that says we train Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturdays we do hard workout, arm days, Okay, so then again, it's the model, the way you think about it. So then you tell people, well, great, just go to more gyms. Well, that's expensive, because then I have to have like a yoga membership, and I have to have a running club, and then I have to have a CrossFit. And so you start to see that, like, the reason people aren't doing this stuff has nothing to do with their interest in it. It's because that they think about things in terms of expense. And so then you get to the real issue is community. The whole point is we're missing a community which sets up and says, okay, we're not like, you would either have to have like a benefactor that can set up and have a large umbrella where we're going to have a campus here. So let's what college. I mean, if I could go back to college again, the one thing I would just really, really enjoy and just soak in all the things that are there. You get intramural sports leagues, you get open-ended access to all these courts and fields, you get a gym, it's all there. But like, that's why I think this is a longer term project, but like the greatest tragedy of, no, I will not say that because there's a lot more things. I'd say at the root of a lot of problems in the American society and society at large is that these tracks, high schools and schools, are just empty most of the time. If you were to take that as a community and bring a community, this is a circle, it's a safe place, it's well lit, you have a field in the middle, people can play, and really turn these empty institutions into a way that you bring community together. You have a physical place where people can come and move, old people walk on the outside, young people sprint on the inside, kids play in the middle. Like, you start to see this as like, okay, what does it look like to have a campus based on movement? You don't need a lot. You can have CrossFit classes. That's one of the reasons CrossFit was so successful, is because it started in garage gyms. You had like a barbell and a little bit of space and some place to go run. These people were out here to work, and that culture still runs through it. And the beautiful part is you're able to strip back to the basics. You take that and then you add, okay, well, what do you need for martial arts? A little bit of mat. What do you need? Just a mat in a flat space. Well, what do you need for gymnastics? Well, some bars and, a beam but mostly it's just trampolines, some stuff, but it's mostly just tumbling, and at the very low level, tumbling and rolling and being able to do cartwheels and stuff. Oh, if you could run at different levels, you sprint, you could do some intervals, you could do some distance, get just some space, maybe a trail or two. You start to see this, a pool, like that brings a whole different flavor into this, what we'll call full human capacity. The hard part about that is that doesn't get baked into the competition to make it interesting for people. Because when I start talking about the community aspect, and it's nice, so you can go train the same place grandma does. Then you start thinking of YMCA vibes, or back with the Y, whatever it is now, which is like, oh, well, we have all these classes and it's great. But we miss the fact that sport is the thing that really compels all of this, which is what is sport? It's just competition. What's competition? It's caring, putting energy into something. And so when we lose sport as the central focusing thing of our movement context, then we lose the motivation to actually put any effort in. And that's when we start to see young men and young women that like need the competitive drive to really get them to show up and do it, which we all are geared towards that. You start to fall off, and then you start to drive that into lesser things, which is just movement without context, which, again, CrossFit in a context of a competition can be great. When it starts just to turn into, this is what I do every single day, what's my WOD, then it turns into a drug. And so that's when you start to realize that, like, you see the conflation of self-worth with my ability to suffer. And this is where, you have calories are baked into this. A lot of the orthorexia stems from, I don't deserve to eat unless I've earned this. And meaning by earn it, I did something hard. By hard, I mean, I'm in pain and sore and suffering. So basically I don't eat till I beat myself up. In other words, if I punch myself in the face or whip myself, then I can have a cookie. That's where you get the whole culture of like, it's Friday, I did my wine, I get my cheat meal. And that's fine because it helps give people some structure to their life, but it's kind of devoid. It's like new construction built with no real trees in the middle. So there's a lot of ideas there, but like, hopefully that the point of all of that is to say that when you question the way you structure your physical capacity, you start to realize that the barriers to doing things that restore your human ability is a lot more subjective. It's artificial, meaning there's no gatekeeping to just being able to go and do all these things. And it just takes a little bit of change. That's the hard part of switching up your routine. I'll say that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we're creatures of habit, and we really find joy and comfort in that. And you hit the nail on the head when I've been thinking about what I want to do to switch up my routines recently. It was exactly that conundrum you went through. Well, now I've got to get a membership at the jiu-jitsu gym again. And when am I going to fit that in? And they don't have the 6 a.m. class. So what? I've got to take time away from the family and it's just the mental torture. And the obvious solution is, let me just build my own thing and have this wonderful like organic movement sanctuary. But that's it sounds like you're working on, Jim. Is that what you're trying to create for yourself? Yeah.
Yeah. There's a few things. I'm about halfway through it, but it will have a track, 100 yards of track. It'll have field. It'll have a sport courts. It has an entire indoor building is all spring floor, jiu-jitsu mats. And basically, I was thinking, what do I want my kids to have access to as they grow up? What do I want to be able to show people and teach them as that? And I think that's the hard part, though, because let me make this whole thing in a different way. Is we really value experts in this culture, right? Where there's someone can show and have an experience. And so because you're not just going to CrossFit, you're going to like at this point, the CrossFit, like one of the CrossFits, right? So it's a big deal. And you're training with the GOAT of CrossFit. I remember growing up, like I was in high school and early college when he was just on that winning streak, and it was unbelievable to watch him. And it was like, wow. But what you also start to realize is that like most of the stuff we have is it's just like a short-term substitute for friends. And I say that meaning if you have a handful, and you've scratched this itch a lot, but if you could have okay. You talked about your friends that said, I'll say guys that you train with. I don't want to put the friends word in your mouth, but you talk about the guys that said, would you go sprint? Well, I don't want to do this. And so what you get is like, imagine, and I'll harken back to the glorified ancestral period of when we, ate and slept and bled under the stars. But in some sense, when you lived in a smaller group and you knew people, and there was you lived in context of like, this is so-and-so and they do this, and I depend on them for this, but I know the people I've lived with. There's a different set of expectations that you bring to your relationship than you do otherwise when it's like, yeah, that's Phil. And Phil and I hang out, drink beers on Friday. But like, if he didn't do it, then it'd be fine because whatever, I got Dave and I kind of do this. But you have these like replaceable, commoditized people. And so this is the idea of a network versus a community. This is a great, I got to start writing down the people that have influenced in that, because very few of these ideas are mine. But this beautiful guy he wrote this book. He's a public school teacher in New York for 31 years. Wrote this book. It's like a short 5 chapters essays he's written. And he talks about the difference between a network and a community. A network is what most of society wants to create, which is you plug people in, they're cogs in the machine, you pull them out, you plug them in, they're replaceable, right? So when you have a social network, it's like, I follow so-and-so, but like if it wasn't them, it'd be somebody else. The second you can say that about a thing, if it's not this, it's that, that's a network. And a network basically commoditizes humans and thinks of them as a machine. You're replaceable. And so if you go to your job as a plumber, you're in a network. I need a plumber. Like if not you and somebody else. But a community is like, well, that's Dave, or that's Rich, or that's, Steve. Like it's not Steven, but Steve. There is no other Steve unless you're in the northeast of England, in which case there's a bunch of other Steves, but like, there's no other you. And that's the thing that we lose in a community, which is a community depends on people that can't be replaced, non-fungible humans, so to speak. Okay. Now, when you have that relationship, there is a thing that only you can do. And I depend on you for that, meaning I'm suspended in a community that is a whole tensegrity structure. And tensegrity is this A little more complicated, but it's the way the fascia holds muscles and bones in tension. So I need a bone. I need a forearm bone, and I need a bicep. Okay, if I don't have those things, I am not a human in the same way. I'm handicapped or disabled. Which again, there's nothing. You're not less worthy, but there's an asterisk beside your name. Your car that can't drive, so to speak, or you can't turn right. Okay. Now, when we take humans and we put them in networks and we remove them of the purpose, we also remove them of consequence of not being there, not acting, not showing up. And we feel this, right? When you have a kid and like early, there's a selfishness of like, I do not want to get up right now because I'm working on something. I'm focused. I'm sleeping, whatever it is. But you can let that baby cry for a minute or 2 minutes and you realize if I don't do this, no one else will, kind of thing, because it's my responsibility. That's part of the emotion regulation the parent had thrust you in. Now, when you start thinking about a community, when you have people that don't share that ethos, meaning, well, I don't sprint because it's like, what they're saying is there's a disconnect in what we value, meaning I value my abilities. And I don't think this is also a personal thing that they're necessarily thinking about, because if you put it in a different look, imagine you're driving down a foggy road and you don't realize that there's an accident 100 yards ahead. But if it wasn't foggy and you could see that, you would act differently. The person who's in a fog isn't a different person. They just have a different set of information. I mean, there's something has not been made clear. And so that's part of my mission, is to really make it clear that sprinting is essentially human activity. Because I guarantee you, if I could phrase the conversation the same way we did earlier about sprinting, they'd go, oh, you start to realize that the cost of what you're not doing about not maximizing your human abilities is really an expression of your not maximizing not being willing to show up fully. Now, what you get is, if you have a group of like-minded friends who share the same intention, and this is true when you have a hockey team. Imagine like the U.S. now, hockey is fresh because the U.S. just won gold yesterday, and it was cool to watch. But I'm not a huge hockey fan or anything, but it was just cool to see that. But imagine you got a guys showing up for the team, and one of them's like, I don't care anymore. I'm just going to drink, and I'm not going to show up. You're not going to trust them, right? But like, that's why we love sports and war, because it gives us clear consequences. But we don't think about that. But it's like, when you show up like that, if you show up and treat yourself like a warrior, which we all love to do. I'm a warrior in the garden, man. Go to CrossFit. It's like, yeah, but treat yourself like that. Because like, if I can't depend on you because I don't know you're sober or you're present, then like, I'm not going to war with you. And yet, because we live in a society that's based on networks, we don't really have to. Therefore, we don't hold each other to account, and we don't actually see the growth we want as people. And so what you get is, if you had like-minded friends that were willing to go bleed with you, so to speak, brothers in arms, then like that conversation would be different about how do we want to set up our training. Because you wouldn't need to have a gym membership for this. You could have a group of guys that wants to set up a warehouse that has jiu-jitsu mats on one side, punching bags on the others, tumble mats for gymnastics, CrossFit barbells and dumbbells, a place to go run and swim. You would have that. You don't need much. It doesn't have to be expensive, because you have community of brotherhood or of sisterhood in whatever terms. And that's why, society, war and stuff like that really brings people into this like place. But, the question, I think, if we look at like the long-term sustainability of humanity, is like, can we create that culture just for the sheer joy of like, you do a psychedelic ceremony. What do you feel? Love, camaraderie, companionship, connection. Can we bring some of that into our everyday, where you wake up and you're grateful for life, and you have someone that holds you to account and says, you're letting me down right now. Your bad moods. And but it's also, if there's something that's going on, I'm here to hold you and be with you because I know you, that kind of thing. Can we be more vulnerable and honest? And so this goes to the sprinting thing. You mentioned vulnerability. If you look at a body map, the adductors, so the big groin muscles between your legs, those have a lot to do with vulnerability and fear of intimacy. So what do you use most when you sprint? You drive into the ground. And this will be the third book, but like really working on this idea of like this body map and how our movements connect to our emotional and psychological experiences. You hit the ground, you punch through the ball. So you pronate, you slightly roll across your foot, but you're punching through the ball of the foot at that first and second metatarsal. So basically the ball of the foot at the big toe and second toe, and you punch and you drive through. So imagine you're throwing a ball, you're going to twist, you're going to push, and it internally rotates. You're rotating your foot in towards the center line of your body. That is the muscle. So your medial hamstring and your adductors, they work to both extend the hip. They're extending the knee, and then they're internally rotating the hip, and then your glutes continue to do this. That whole pattern of driving down and internally rotating. So you're firing your adductors. If you go to a max 400-meter sprint, I guarantee you the thing that will blow up is your adductors. And guess what? And by I mean max, you really have to go for it. And that's where the sprinting is. You're going to feel that as well. You might think it's your hamstrings, you might think it's your quads, but that whole middle chunk of the leg, we don't really think about because it's hard to train in, say, a sagittal plane CrossFit setting. Again, not the CrossFit, but just typically like a bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman, typical barbell sport, which is hard to grab something sideways. We don't think about rotation. But when you get that and you max out rotation, you're going to feel those adductors blow up like anything else because you showed up in a way that, you know, you didn't necessarily think about it. And it's not just about doing Cossack squats and side and splits and working on that stuff. That's great for the adductors, but there's a rotational, which is everything in context and maximal tension. You have the speed, strength, stamina, and stretch all together in one for this. I'm going to put as much force in the ground as I can repeatedly. It's not just a single leg balance or single leg jump or a, you know, single leg broad jump. It's plyometrics, it's rhythm, it's power, it's speed, it's aggression, it's rawness, and it's repetitive for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 steps in a row. That'll blow your adductors. And so that's where you start talking about the tension. And so someone that doesn't have access to that, then it's like, okay, there's a vulnerability you're not willing to express, which means that there's weakness that you're not willing to look at, which means that I don't know if I could trust you. We don't say it like that because that's really hard. But imagine if you had that culture about, you know, 8 to 10 guys, that's a football team or a tribe or a hunting party. And those are the guys you train with. And so I think that's very on point, but it requires a whole different set of skills than just, you know, what's the wad on the wall. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's what always fascinated me about jiu-jitsu and that level of camaraderie is there's almost like a deeper layer of the connection that's required, because I'm trusting you with my body also. I'm not just trusting like training in a gym, going and doing back and buys with your bros or going and doing a WOD. Like, we're engaging in competition. The reason competition is fun in the first place is because it first requires collaboration. We're agreeing to the set of standards and we're going to gamify this and it's going to be great. Right. But when you add in twisting of joints and delicate knees and your ability to honor my tap when you've got me in a choke, because basically what I'm saying is, okay, you killed me, but if I can't trust you and you don't let go of that, it's not going to be good. It's not going to end well. So that's what's really special about the contact sports too, is the level of trust and intimacy and connection, and also just the skills and how fun it is and how primal it is for men to, you know, fight, and women too. It kind of takes people really deep. I think, you know, some of my best friendships were forged by kicking the shit out of each other because we trusted each other also. It was so funny how we could like punch each other in the head so hard and then try and strangle each other and then hug it out and then talk about life and then share, you know, these delicate moments, because there was a deep, deep level of trust, because you're not just a training partner in the sense that we sweat together. I trust you with my life, literally. When you've got me in that chokehold, or you could be a dick and snap my arm right now, and you don't, I trust you with my life. So that's really cool too. And yeah, I think I'm reaffirming some of the things that I'd really like to, you know, get back into as well and have that as part of my life. But yeah, I've got a space on my land over here and it's a big old garage and it's just laying empty right now. It's massive. It's only a couple of years old. It's perfect for something like a hybrid gym. And that term's interesting right now because of the hybrid athlete movement, which I'd love to get your thoughts on too, because hybrid athlete becomes synonymous with just impressive like output, but they're not athletes, right? Like, you don't do anything that's really athletic. And I'm not poo-pooing it. I've got a lot of friends that do this and they love it, but athlete to me is a very well-rounded person that can, you know, can fight and run and balance and flip and do all of this cool stuff, not just like crush the ergs.
So what you, yes to everything you said. And I think there's a beautiful, one of the things, just a note on what does all martial arts have in common, except for wrestling? They're barefoot. There's a vulnerability, a sacred ground. You know, you harken back to the Old Testament when Moses encounters God at the burning bush. What is the first thing he says? Or and any time there's an encounter with God, take off your shoes. You're on sacred ground. Okay, that's part of honoring the fact that when we're training together, this is sacred ground. We're going to go do something, which is to expose ourselves in the service of some greater good that's sacred. And so, like, being barefoot is also like being mindful of where you're at. So, just a note on that. The thing with a hybrid athlete is what we miss is there's a difference between athlete and athletic. They are different words. Athlete just stems from the Greek word to the he who competes, to compete, right? To the one who competes. So any competition is like, you could be a dart athlete. It's like to put effort in, to put risk on, to gambling. Like there's some, like, you know, esports athlete. So that's what you can be a very one-sided, very specific athlete, which is just the willingness to put out energy and to care. And so when I think about athletes, just like, that's where you get like, oh, I'm a CEO or a tactical athlete. It's like, no, I'm putting my heart out there. So there's something to be said for that, because it does require effort to care, to put yourself out in line, so to speak. That is a very different thing than looking at the suite of human abilities that are make you athletic, which is, I'd have to think about that. But to me, I define athletic as just having access to your full human abilities. It's in that, but it's like, if athletic is like compassionate in a sense, it's like empathic. It's probably a way you can show up with your full suite of emotional abilities. There's corollaries to this, right? So we look at athletic as like the physical, emotional. I have to think about that a little bit more. But what I'm getting at is like, what's the point of being athletic? What's like, it allows you to show up with your full presence, your full force, so to speak. And so that's what we miss, is this idea of like, okay, I have a narrow window of things that I can do, but the second things change, it's not that's the thing I have is like, okay, it is not challenging or technically difficult to have a high VO2 and be strong. Like, that's great. It's just doesn't make you athletic. And it's like the idea of, all right.
No.
It's as though we are back-ending categories to compare ourselves with. Again, this is a standard to hide behind. Oh, this is what I do. Or say, well, if you make your identity based off the fact that I can suffer on a run and then move heavy weight in a small thing, it's like, yes, but if that identity ultimately is just hiding blind spots about what it really matters, then it's like, what's the real purpose of this? Like, what's the intention behind this label you have? Athleticism, again, it's I tried my best to be able to quantify it with the basic ability, but be able to sprint. But then within that is the jump, hang, crawl, throw, sprint, roll, stride, etc. Like you get these lower capacities, you go up the ladder, but it exceeds quantification. Meaning, it's not something you can sit there and say, "Oh, I'm an athlete," or "I'm athletic because I have this number, this number, this number." Because it's really it's a personal question. It's like, are you athletic? Yeah, I can't do what I used to. My back hurts a little bit, and like, yes, and it's like there is something to be said for aging with grace, right? Because what I do think is the point of all these physical lessons is to teach us the more psychological, emotional, spiritual things that we carry with us, so we can, as you age, there is a full force you're able to continue to bring that isn't always measured by the physical. Because the point of life is to continue to learn to transcend in something, but how can you transcend what you've never ascended to? And that's the thing I think we miss, is we jump to the spiritual thing. And again, it's like, I think psychedelics, I've used them several times. I'm a huge advocate in the right setting and context, etc. But the idea of like going on a spiritual retreat, doing a full body fast and juice cleanse, etc., where you're just going to like shortcut this part. It's like, there's something you can only learn at at meter 350 on a 400 meter sprint. And there's something you can only learn by getting strangled out by somebody. There's a humility. There's a willingness to learn and change and to grow, which, like, if you think of what kids do before we have any capacity for abstract thought, before we can think in terms of numbers and words and these, like, with life and death and these non-present, non-tangible experiences, we're just moving. It's all movement. And what do kids do? They play, they run around, they giggle, they play, they throw, they have little competitions, and they set up. And then what do they move into is just a continuation where we're going through the movements of survival as a celebration act of like, I'm going to go do this. And play is such it is so ingrained in what it means to be alive that, like, lobsters play. The quote Jordan Peterson is like, it's just one of those things that's at the very essence of what it means to be alive is to play. And what is play? It's just movement for the sake of movement. Play is not work. So work and play are juxtaposed with one another. Play is just fun. You do it for the sake of doing it. But there is something that happens because there's this orthogonal learning where a watched pot never boils. A watched human doesn't learn. Like, an observed human does not learn, because there's self-consciousness, there's fear, there's what if, and so that gets in your head. So the point of getting back to this idea of play is like, play is just engaging with the world. And so that is like, if you don't have your full human abilities, then how can you play? Because you're kind of thinking, I'd like to play, I want to go do this thing, I want to try this striding, but I got to watch out for my hamstring, but I got to watch out for my calf, whatever this is. In the back of your mind doing that. So how do you expose yourself and build back into this? It's like, okay, well, you have to honor the fact that there's a set of movements that your body is able to do. Like, you're not trying to expect yourself to fly or to live underwater. There's a level of, there's honesty. This is the human form. This is what I can do. Within that, can I do all the things a human can do? Because if I can't, then there's something I'm not doing. And so then I can make subcategories of like, well, and this is, I think you get some of the, again, there's neurodegeneracy, there are things that are atypical and whatever normal is, but you start to see some of the glamorization, fetishization and the glorification of, well, I'm autistic or I've got ADHD, and you throw out because it's like what it just gives you a label to hide behind. But like just because you're ADHD doesn't mean you like shouldn't be able to sit there and be present with your kids. Like all of this stuff is we throw it out there because it's the stand like a standard is painful. Like to be the standard bearer in any context is painful because it holds you to account, which is why I think, we like a broader conversation about the patriarchy and let's just say a symbol of a essential ethos of religion, what it means to have God as a center of a society. But it just means like there's a standard of conduct that we support, that we think this is in service of the best good, that humanity, there are many ways to do this thing and not all of them are going to take you the same road. And so that there are some ways that are better than others that honor whatever it is that this human spirit is. And so that's painful. And when you start to see that trickling down all the way to like, well, I'm just going to label myself this because that gives me an out. I don't have to work on that. And nobody that's of sound mind would ever look at someone who's truly in a wheelchair or handicapped and ever like want anything but the best and want to go out of their way to support them. Right. But we all look at the person that's like just gaming the system different. So when you start to take that same lens to people who just hide behind a label or hide behind a certain, adjective, it's like, that's not an excuse to show up. And so again, it gets back to the same thing. Well, why don't you go do something else? Call yourself whatever you want, but like there's no such thing as a hybrid athlete because athleticism by definition is a hybrid of all the things. It's, it's funny. It's like hybrid athlete means I do more than one sport, but it's like, okay, so like by definition, someone that goes and plays rugby, like, well, they're really strong and they can run. So are they a hybrid athlete or are they just an athlete? It's weird. There's these self-contained disciplines, which is just, we've just then arbitrarily took to them. If I do yoga and then lift weights, am I a hybrid athlete? Like it's arbitrary. And that's what bothers me is because in most cases, it just continues to hide behind objectives and standards and misses the point of like, well, dude, can you do the things a human should do? And then could I depend on you in like a meaningful thing? And look, I don't care. Whatever people want to do, it's fine. But the bigger issue is what this stands for as a marker in the culture at large, which is what are we encouraging people to focus on and care about? And like, how can we start to get them back into a context which actually calls them forth? And I think there's some maturity you see, at least maybe not at the young kids doing jiu-jitsu or like martial arts, but like you see some of these guys that know what it takes to get a brown, purple, black belt. It's like most of them are leaders. They show up there. They understand what it's like to like suffer and to be challenging, but they'll sit around and talk afterwards. It's that part that we're missing. It's like, it's not just to show up and beat, kick each other. It's like, it's life. And so that's where how do you put movement, let's say a physical training practice back in a context where it matters of this is making you someone who can show up. But if you're so beat up from whatever workout you did that you can't go and play with your kids, that's something's wrong. And if you're so like uncoordinated after all the training you do that you can't throw a ball with your kid, like there's an issue there.
Yeah. The play thread that you've got wove into that several times is so important to me. It's something I've tried to think about so much because at the end of the day, big questions, like what is life and what's the point of it? And God, if I know, but I do think that we could probably have more fun along the way. And a thing that is woven throughout humanness and also throughout the animal kingdom is this essence of play. And when you become a parent, you watch your children and they play and you realize that when you play, you're having so much more fun. And you're like, oh, you know what? More people could probably do it is a little more play. And doing things in the essence of play is really wonderful. And that was something that was really eye-opening for me yesterday. I said I sprinted yesterday. I didn't say that I brought my nephew into it, who was sitting on the couch, and I just threw down the gauntlet of a healthy challenge. I was like, hey, Neff, come on, let's go hit some sprints. And you could see he didn't really want to do it, but he wanted to follow, the lead of somebody that he respects and gain. And, there's that little bit of a, young lion trying to establish his hierarchy in the pack, so to speak. So we got out and we only did, we did a, 10-minute warm up and then we hit like 6 sprints, probably about, 50 yards, nothing crazy. But the entire time we were laughing, we were laughing and shit talking, and it was so playful. And you can't not have some fun when you're flying your body, hurling your body forward through space, especially when there's someone at the side of you and there's a little bit of that banter. And then my wife pokes her head out and she's like, oh, I dust both of you. And it's just all very playful. And there's a lot of laughs and there's a lot of giggles. So, whatever it is that we do, I just think, getting more play in our lives is a winning formula, whether that's, the wrestling, the jiu-jitsu, the art, the dance, the playing with your children. But you're dead on. If you lose the ability to play and everything becomes so serious, whether that's because it's restricted through your mental capacities or your physical meat suit that has become so stiff or so injured or so broken or so sore, what's it all for at the end of the day? I think play is something to try and keep more forefront of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of the, let's say if there's one issue with there's no issue, but if your athleticism has got you nursing injuries behind the scene, then like that's the hard part is like, there's a play aspect too, which is just like going in for the sake of exploration. And that's a beautiful thing. And then you start to see the immediate, like, well, because then the question for you is like, okay, if I say, hey, you should go play more, what is the back of your mind? It's like, well, yeah, that's all fun and games, but like, as long as I can go back and get my hard work out, it's like that's where it gets this deeper question of like self-worth. And, like, why is it that we've associated this like self-deprecation and challenge and hard? Because play can be hard. There's this idea of like play hard, work hard, live easy, this sense of like, but why it's when we have the inability. So athleticism, another way to define this is range. So you can think of like, I can go from fast to slow. I can go from strong or tense to relaxed. And I can, the faster I can have this dynamic range switch, the more athletic I am. And in some sense, it's the challenge isn't that we can go and do a WOD, like to be able to turn it on. So that's what I was saying earlier when we talk about stamina, this ability to just be present with suffering. Like at this point, I've did years of endurance running, I did years of CrossFit and powerlifting and barbell sports. Now I've got years of jiu-jitsu and gymnastics, and there's a range you get from doing that with it. Like I think by the time you're like mid 30s, like men, I think peak around 37, your testosterone starts to get the highest, and it doesn't drop off, but it starts to like, it's not like you're getting more and more testosterone. Obviously if you have an animal-based diet, then you're supported by Heart and Soil supplements, you are going to crush it forever, and your testosterone will never cease to ever. It will never crescendo. But the point is like there's the peak, and then it starts to maintain, and so you start to think about like my 20s and my 30s. I think about this idea of going to war, right? And I think if there's one downfall of CrossFit, so to speak, in a modern lexicon, it's the idea of like we go to war every day, but you can't do that because there's an emotional and physical tax of like actually going all out. And, when you're I think you get like one less day every year. So when you're in your 20s, you could do 6 days a week. When you're in your teens, kids just go to war all the time, but they don't really have the skill because there's a level of like when you're an infant, you don't really have the ability to physically challenge yourself. When you're teens, you start to develop that. So by the time you're 20, you actually have the physical capacity. So you can go to war 6 days a week. Your 30s or maybe 5 days a week. 30s, you could do a full work day, maybe 4 days a week. 40s, you could probably 3 days a week of like really going and challenge. 50s, maybe 2. And then your 60s and 70s, you get like one every week, one every other week. And, but that doesn't mean you're not trying hard, but it's like, there's a real, I'm going for it. Like I'm really going to push myself. And I think that's like the WOD is one of the great things of like, let's set up container. We can really go for it. And that's beautiful. But honoring the fact that like, okay, there are other aspects of life. There should be a natural transition of like you go through and learn different movements, different skills, and develop. Because what is a movement? What is a container? What is a sport other than a container for an emotional experience? That like the emotional experience of going in. I'd say a sport is really more varied. There's types of sports, right? There's like, dancing and skateboarding and slacklining and surfing is a different engagement than something like soccer is a team sport, which is different than like a martial arts or grappling sport, which is different than a chess so like that's again, I'm working on through that idea. But if you think about these containers of training, so let's keep it simpler. What is training other than just setting different containers of different emotional experiences? Because that the genre of music you're going to play when you're going for a 5K run is going to be different than the genre of music you're playing for a powerlifting session or a friend, or when you're going to do a movement flow or yoga. It's like all of these self-contained disciplines are just entryways to different challenges, different emotional states. And so for you to be able to get in there, know you can manage it, and like find connection in that, like with yourself, it's like, okay, I know I can trust that if I have to go longer than I think I need to, yeah, that's easy. It's just like, it's this color I'm going to step into. It's blue, like running distance is blue and lifting weights is red and being able to do a WOD is yellow. And it's like, okay, I have a full color. I'm a full rainbow because I can go to all these places and I can do that stuff. Sure, it might not be the best I can do, but you could still show up at 80% of your best is all relative too, because like in that best, if I shot you full of amphetamines and told you your spouse is going to die if you don't do this thing, you'll do better, right? So like but in general, like, you can show up and do the job and do it well. And then it's like, yeah, that idea though is like being able to have access to those different containers, but unexpected, like, and this goes to the level of like, okay, do you need to be able to maintain 99? Because I'm in my head, I'm thinking now what you said earlier, which is if I can't do 99.9% of my best sprint, like, look, if you get there's the Johnson, forget his first name. This amazing Michael Johnson, the 85% rule. His coach watched him and realized that like he did his best sprinting when it was 85%. That I think is a really good thing to remember. It's the power laws. It's not that you need to be able to do. Again, 99.9% supposes that there's this 100% the best you could possibly do, et cetera, right? But it's like, sorry, even the best of the best in their own context would like Noah Lyles did that run, but it was pulled, like literally you see him, he's like in last place after 40 meters. And then he's like almost catapulted forward. It's unreal. It's like, I don't even know how it happened, but I don't know if he could do that again. It would have that context, that specific thing. And so just getting too caught up on the numbers, but there's a level of like, can you show up with, because 100% effort would literally kill you. So like if you go every single bit in your full life, it would kill you if you actually did 100%, because it would just be, you would explode in the pursuit of this thing. So it's not that, but it's like, can I be fully present in this moment to do this thing? And there's something about the 85%. I think that does really well, but like, if you've trained in a modality, you have ability, then you can sprint, you can jump, you can do all of these things. And that gives you the capacity to go to all these different emotional contexts, to have all these different colors, all the different genres. You're a full person. And that is the foundation within which you can then go and take on bigger challenges, like being a father or a mother, being a parent, so to speak, having a business, owning a house, whatever it is, like being part of a real stakeholder in a community and like running for election and stuff like that. It's like it puts you in this because now you understand what it's like to have skin in the game, to care, to lose, to suffer, to win, to struggle, to overcome. If that's not the point of training, then I don't know what the point is. And it's like, and that's different than play. If the point of train isn't to allow you to have greater capacity, because there's a play, train, compete thing. And again, I know I can go on forever, but play, train, compete. You play, which is just moving for the sake of movement. You explore the field of possibilities without having to commit to anything. You can go back and forth. You play, just see what it is, right? Then you find something that points out that got my attention. It could be a pain point, could be you could lose, whatever it is. Something grabs your mind. Now I'm going to train that. What is training? It's conditioning tissue. If you want to condition leather, you beat it. You expose it to the similar circumstances over and over again so that the tissue, the literal chemical material, forms in a different capacity. Now you're conditioning that. Okay, I've trained it, then I compete, which is I'm going to apply some effort, apply some real tension, apply some consequence to the movement to see, what happens. And then from that, it's like, okay, wow, I learned, I grew, and I get feedback. I'm going to go play again. And it's a cycle. That's the practice. That is it. Play, train, compete. Play, train, compete. That's just the practice. That's a cycle. So if you get stuck in the training and you never compete, then you never actually transcend because you don't learn and you can't go back to play because if you're training, you just started at some point when you were a kid, you played a sport, and then all of a sudden it got super serious and your coach yelled at you and you didn't make the team. So now you have this grudge, or you get injured and you have this knee thing you carry. We just get stuck as adults in their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s that we're just perpetually training. We never actually compete. We never apply anything. We never risk anything. We never learn. And then we never get to go back to play. And then we get in the cycle, but we're perpetually training because all training is focusing on what you don't have. And that's what you get: bunions, you get shoes that like new to your feet, you cut off your glutes, you get hip and back problems because you get stiff because you're only focused on what you lack, not what you have. And then that means that you're not able to transcend that because you actually never like own it. And so that's the deeper capacity, the deeper problem at the root of this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You just tease shoes there, and we can't end this conversation without going into the fact that you talked about the sacredness of being barefoot, the problem sometimes with super shoes that are going to fix all your problems and make you run faster. And you aren't just the guy online that's helping people sprint again. Specifically, your handle is the Barefoot Sprinter. Why so important? Where did that kind of philosophy develop?
I had a bunch of issues, injuries, and it's not like the reason I know what I know about the body is because I've either suffered it or helped. But like I've had dozens of injuries and lots of little aches and pains from big to small, and a lot of those started off with the feet. So the first major injury I ever had was an ankle sprain, and that I didn't really just run into I rode in college for a year and it was running to practice, stepping a rock, boom. That was my first experience going to physical therapy. And I walked in or crutched in, and then it was and calf raises once a week for 4 weeks, and then you're on your own. And then I remember distinctly going out on a field with my friend. He threw a football, and I just kind of did some gentle cuts, and I'm like, I guess I'm okay. And that one injury really set me up in this long-term path of like, oh, when you have people with ankle sprains, there's a significant long-term degradation of glute and hip strength up the chain. So meaning your you lose access to full hip function. You're weak. Your foot gets weak. My arch collapsed. And you start to, because of your arch collapses, meaning you lose integrity there. Your toes start to shift form. You can no longer function. So what I realized is that most of the injuries I had later on, back injuries, knee tendonitis, shoulder issues, came from the fact that like my muscles started to fail from the bottom up. And so years later, as a young aspiring trainer, I was like, man, I feel like a hypocrite trying to help people when I'm literally in pain and like, I can't even, I'm trying to go work out and I can't do my workout kind of thing. And so I'm like, there's something off here. And for whatever reason, I just looked down and I was like, why do I stand like this? And one leg was straight, one leg was cooked out the side, my hips were crooked. I'm like, I saw a video of myself at the same time and I looked like I walked like a duck. And I was like, what am I doing? Which ducks also walk perfectly fine. I don't know why they get this bad rap, but I was like, I'm embarrassed that I'm literally a coach trying to teach people athleticism. I'm like 23 at the time. I'm like, this is silly. And so I just started to figure things out. And the only thing that really started to help was like, oh, I can't really move my foot. And I tried to do these things, and I started stripped away. I got it to my socks and barefoot. I'm like, wow, actually, like it's like imagine you're trying to teach someone how to use a power drill, and they only have an oven mitt, and you're trying to learn this power drill, and you get it, and you finally like strip it off, and you strip it off the thin latex glove underneath you. But I was like, oh, if I feel this thing, it's so much better. And I got dexterity back, and I got control back, and I'm like, oh, there's something here. And so I just started to notice all of these patterns in my clients as well. I'm like, oh, like everyone walks around and you take your shoes off, you still walk the same way. It's like we've lost access to our feet. And so that turned into just everything I did was lifting in minimalist shoes, like the toe separated shoes, like Vibram 5 fingers. And I started just going out, learning to run again and trying to practice all these things. I had horrible shin splints and knee pain. And I was just like, I felt like I was running on pegs that were not the Oscar Pistorius ones, just this peg leg. And then I during the COVID, I got more, back to outside. And I ran track and cross country in high school, but it was never fast. All I wanted to do was be on the 4x4 team. And I finally made the alternate my senior year, but it was just like years of like struggling to get a little bit faster. And so I still had that passion, that unrequited love and the unrequited energy from my youth. And so I started to apply that. I want to get back to sprinting, but it's just the idea of running in shoes, it felt so off. And so I just stripped it back and I was able to run on a turf field. And then I was realized that like, oh, this feels really good. And so I just kept doing it. And eventually you get a little notoriety and it becomes a thing online. But I noticed with my clients is like, if I make you take your shoes off, you do not get injured, because when you're sprinting barefoot, you do not overstride, you do not heel strike, your steps become self-reiterating. It's like a self-propagating system. And I was like, oh, so the point of barefoot sprinting is nothing to do with like the barefoot spot. You can still sprint correctly in shoes, obviously, but it's the barefoot forces you to learn and do it well. Meaning if you can sprint barefoot, it means you can do it well. You're not over leveraging super shoes that spring you forward or massive heels that let you slam your heel and then overstride or roll through for you. You're really out there. You're really present. And so the barefoot part is just an intention you bring to do this well and have full feedback, full texture, full feel. So if you find a safe space and you go sprint barefoot, it's like, that is the ultimate expression of like, I own my body.
Yeah, the presence is everything for me. Like you said, it becomes a way to speed run, pun intended, the ability to do it right, because you can't run in these artificial ways that would hurt you or injure you when you remove all of the padding. But it's just, I think most of the magic is in what you said, which is it forces you to pay acute attention to everything. Even just walk. I was just in Costa Rica for a few weeks and I was barefoot for 95% of that entire vacation. But when you're barefoot, even just walking around, you're aware of your steps. You're feeling the ground, the temperature. Oh, this asphalt is pretty hot. Let me get to the grass, and then let me get to this. And and certain ones feel really nice, and certain ones don't feel really nice. But you're always paying attention, and when you're paying attention to that, you're not usually paying attention to the other bullshit, most of which is just distracting you from being here and now. So there's something very magical about the barefoot lifestyle, and Last night when I ran my sprints were in Vivo Barefoot sneakers, and I'll do them in the Earth Runners. Or if I can find a patch of grass, you best believe I'm letting the dogs go raw. But I love that idea of just increasing the awareness and the presence that you bring to everything, because ultimately at the end of the day, if you're not training that also, or playing with that, or however we want to talk about it, you're kind of missing the point. That's the great illusion, right? Is to always be here now and then never experience here and now, because you're always up here living in your head. And as Tony Robbins would say, if you're living in your head, you might as well be dead, because you're missing this wonderful thing of being more present. And that's a cool little segue, and maybe a good place to start bringing this one into land for today, because I feel like in many ways we just scratched the surface, and there's so much that you do and can teach, but I think you do such a good job of this through your social media. It's very much geared towards helping people reclaim this pattern and this amazing, lost in some respects, human art of sprinting. I do want to close with a couple of things. Number one, obviously, you got to let people know where to go to find you and get enrolled in your programs or offerings or educations. But number two, you must have a cool sprint story. And I want to know your favorite sprint story, either personal or the coolest memory or story you've got of helping someone reclaim their ability to sprint.
So it's at the Barefoot Sprinter everywhere, YouTube, whatever, Instagram, all the handles, the Barefoot Sprinter. And then the website is barefootsprinter.com. So I wrote about a few of these in my book, but one of them that jumps to my mind is I had a client, Jeff, and like helping him. We over the span of a few years helped him lose 70 pounds, and then just seeing him get back to sprinting was really powerful. But like, there's a medley of these, like watching my dad, who's got Parkinson's, get back to some level of. And again, these aren't like, are they all out sprinting? But it's like, it's just the range, and I think that's the beauty of like seeing somebody, because a lot of what I do in these events and seminars I'll host is teach people how to sprint again, and there is just like. Nobody knows this, but the ancillary skill you get from doing what I do is being really good at running beside somebody with a gimbal and taking a video of them. Like a gimbal is just a handheld, it's like a stick that adjusts the smartphone. And so there is a change. There's two things that always happen, because as everyone starts off and they go through the way I progressive is like, I remember when I started doing some gymnastics, it's like the coaches did such a great job of small progressions, little baby steps at a time, that you realize like you're moving forward, you don't even realize you are. And so you work from like, I literally start from standing. Like, let's get off the ground, let's stand, and let's walk. Let's take that first step and feel that. Okay, let's start to speed up, but let's shift into a run. Now let's feel this, pick your knees up, find some tension, and like slowly transition from like relaxation to tension, active tension. And then you move forward, and then it's like, okay, well now you're striding. Okay, let's try a little bit more. And there's a transition point where people go from that stride to that sprint. And inevitably, it's something they haven't done forever. And there is two things. They always look at me and they come back like, I feel like a kid again. That right there, when I hit that, I know I've done it. I've done it. And the next thing is being able to show them the video, because there's something about being able to see yourself, because there's a power involved in being able to see yourself sprint, that like you see, wow, I'm moving fast. And with a gimbal on the phone, it's like me running beside you, keeping pace. And there's just like, you see the ground going beside you, you're passing people. And it's just like, there's this feeling of like both joy and potential of like, I feel like a kid again. It's just the most rewarding thing I hear from people. But then also this level of like, I feel powerful. It's two ends of the spectrum. Like I feel joyful in like this kind of openness of childhood possibility, with the power of like, man, that's me. And like that, it's like there's this amalgamation of experiences, because it's so consistent when people get to see themselves. I mean, you feel this thing and you see it, it's just like, it really walks away and it leaves a mark of like a changed person afterwards. And that's like, there is no better feeling for me personally, because everything beyond that is situational, right? Like then you go, like you said, we scratch the surface, things get more detailed. You can always get down to the nitty gritty. You can look at like how this actually applies to your circumstance, what you would do. And that's when you start to look at like, okay, there's these capacities, training this and that, going there. But like when it comes to these large peak moments, being able to go overcome something that you otherwise felt inhibited by, and then reclaim something you thought was behind you, it's like, that's a beautiful thing. And that right there, it just like, it's hard to put into words, but like it's that experience over and over again.
I love it, mate. I love it. I couldn't agree more. I don't help people reclaim their ability to sprint directly, but I've had similar things echoed to me through retreat experiences or coaching in the past, and just that essence of, for sounding dramatic, but the truth of it is, like, you changed my life. There's no better gift that
Mm.
somebody can give you as the coach, as the guide, as the social media creator, however we want to identify ourselves, to hear somebody say, like, you gave me a gift back of like childhood wonder and health and energy again. It's about the best thing ever. And I hope that this conversation serves as perhaps a catalyst for somebody to do that, like to go to
Yeah.
your page, to kind of hear this conversation, somewhat get motivated to think about the last time. I started this conversation straight up. When was the last time you sprinted, Graham? And you was like, yeah, about 10 days ago. And that would be the kind of closing invitation for the listener. Like, when was the last time you sprinted? And I bet there's a non-insignificant amount of people listening to this, like, I don't even remember. It could have been years. And I hope that this could be the catalyst to getting you back to doing that. Maybe don't go out there cold and blow a hamstring and expose those vulnerabilities we were talking about, but implement the strategies that Graham talks about on his social media, and just start getting out there again and testing it. Any closing words of wisdom or thoughts on that, Graham?
Yes, because there is a let's just say the first step back to sprinting is wiggling your toes. It is not a sprint. That's literally why I spent 7 years building a suite of, like, a process, so they help people go from, like, reconnect with your feet and then restore your body, and like go through these steps. But yes, so that's a whole thing that could get more complex, but it really is not. It's just it's a set of experiences your body needs to feel as it wakes itself up. But yes, the first step is not to do that. But the first step is really just go walk, and then start to shift, find an empty grass field, walk, shift forward, get a little bit faster, open up, and then just get to a stride and skip. But I wanted to say, with your nephew, Neff, as you call him, like, even though, like, that moment you probably thought about it, like, you by engaging him a little bit of friendly competition with some sprinting, you opened up a state change for him. And I think that's powerful, because, like, as a kid, he's not going to go on a psychedelic trip, but, like, even just with sprinting, like, that's one of the things, I don't think you gave yourself credit for it, but it was one of those things where, like, you, by engaging and being a leader and a role model in his life, you literally shifted his body to, and who knows how he's processing that, but, like, he went from couch to like sprinting, and to moving well, and to being present. And that's a thing that I think is really beautiful. So, like, even if you're not a sprint coach or whatever, like, being able to just physically do something with your body invited someone else into that same experience, that then opened up possibility for them. And that, I truly, is like, that's the infectiousness of it. And, like, you want, like, a deeper impact of, like, parents who can't sprint, like, yes, what are you teaching your kids? And so, like, I just want to give you credit for that as a closing thought of, like, man, it matters, because you are the living representation of what it means of your values. You are the living representation of your values, and your kids are watching. And so,
boom. That is a great way to end it. Very well said, my friend. I hope we get to share some sprints in person one day, if our paths cross. And I'm sure if not, those twins are going to keep you on your toes and keep you running around like a maniac. So it will, to a long life full of memories and sprints, my friend. The Barefoot Sprinter on Instagram. Go check Graham out and all. He's got tons of resources, a really awesome community over there. And by this time next week, when the next episode goes live, I hope you've got some war stories about how you got back out there and sprinted and brought your nephews in, or your kids in, or your aunties, or your uncles, or your dads, or whatever it is. You guys rock. Graham, thank you very much for the conversation, my friend. And we'll see y'all next week. Peace out. All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.